Hey everyone, welcome to Crushing Classical, redefining a thriving classical music career. On the show today, I have the film composer Larry Groupé. Larry has been in the film music industry for years, and we dive into the ins and outs of how he built his career from the bottom up. You'll hear great advice on how to do it and key pieces to the puzzle on how he broke into that competitive scene. We also go into the film music recording industry. As a musician, I've always wondered about how to get these gigs, knowing that studio gigs for movies are among the highest paid jobs out there. Larry talks about why these jobs are so high paid and how the recording side of this industry is becoming even more competitive. Before we begin, a couple of quick things. I'd like to thank Fix Music for being a sponsor of Crushing Classical Podcast. FixMusic.com is your online resource for high-quality sheet music at great prices. Check out their latest offerings like hard-to-get music and frequently back-ordered parts. Fix also offers unique solutions for buying music for teachers and schools. Whether you have a large private teaching studio or you run a music program, Fix has a solution for you. Contact them through their website for more information. And Fix now offers free shipping on all domestic orders. If you need sheet music fast, Fix will expedite it to you as inexpensively as possible. Also, remember to use the special discount link in the show notes and get 10% off your order. Also, Drone Tuner, a tuner app that I came up with, is now a reality. One day I was practicing, hating that ugly mechanical sounding tone coming out of the machine and wishing for a tuner with a drone that actually sounded like a horn. I contacted a friend who owns the company Embertone, a company that creates virtual instruments for composers. Using the technology he uses for his instruments, Drone Tuner was born, and it is out now, currently available on iOS for iPhone and iPad. It has all the instruments you'd ever want to tune, and not only can you tune to the real sound of your own instrument or any instrument you want to tune with, the visual technology in this tuner app is amazing. It has a super fast reaction time and is very similar to the strobe tuners from back in the day. People are already in love with this app. Some things people are saying about Drone Tuner. Best app ever. I have never felt more comfortable playing in ensembles after using this app for just a few weeks. And I use the Drone Tuner to tune my college orchestra. It works great with the iPad 4. You can tune intervals and chords and even with vibrato. Check it out on our website, dronetunerapp.com, to see video tutorials on how the app works or check out the videos in the App Store. Get yours today at the iTunes App Store. The link is in the show notes. Let's get started. Hey, Larry, how are you?
Very good, Tracy. Thanks.
So
How are
glad to
you?
have you on. I'm fine, thanks. I'm so glad you're here on Crushing Classical. So I just want to introduce you really fast. Larry Groupé, composer. You've written music for films and TV shows. Would you tell me some of the ones you've written music for?
Sure. On the film side, some of the bigger titles would be The Contender. That was an important movie that we did. I did with the director. Gosh, I guess that would be 11 years ago, but it's the one that got 2 Academy Award nominations. Steven Spielberg personally bought the film and gave it to DreamWorks to release, and that was a major first film. Since then, also films like Straw Dogs, which is a big thriller for Sony, Resurrecting the Champ, which was a nice drama with Samuel L. Jackson and Josh Hartnett, and then down into more indie films, of which I do a fair amount. So it's depending on how much your listeners are into indie films, but there's quite a few there. And then, of course, things like documentaries and so on, and then over into the world of television as well. So,
Awesome.
mhm.
Awesome.
uh,
So take me back to like when you were first, because this is such a great, exciting career. And take me back to when you were first starting out in LA, and you'd just gone to music school, right? I'm supposing that you
mhm.
went and studied composition, but you wanted to
Right.
try out films. How did you know that's what you wanted to do?
Well, I wasn't entirely sure I knew I wanted to do it. I just knew I had really had a strong interest in it. And as you just said, I was at University of California, San Diego at UCSD. That's where I was doing my postgraduate work, as you say, as a composition major. And when I was finishing that post graduate degree, that's when I was going, Hollywood is just an hour north of me. and I think I really want to give this a shot. So when I finished with UCSD, I wanted to really concentrate on trying to get in to be a film composer. And there's a lot of different ways it can happen. Everybody has probably their own story. It's a very competitive world, of course.
Yeah.
I remember hearing from probably the most famous, not famous, but the most successful agent for film composers. I was listening to him speak at an event once, and he had said, there's basically three ways to be a film and TV composer. One is your parents are, are famous actors or producers in the industry, so they can help you get started because of their incredibly important contacts. Or the second way is you come in a parallel world, such as Danny Elfman, was interested in doing this, and he was already famous from Oingo Boingo. Also, suddenly drawing a blank on his name. It's coming to me in a minute. It's Mark Mothersbaugh. He was in a very famous band called Devo. And so when you come in as, let's say, as a rock star or something like that, Trent Reznor currently would be another example. People are automatically interested in you and doing music for their film or TV show. So because they already know who you are from the pop side or the rock side of the world. So that's the second way to get started. And then the third way, which is my way, which is for most of us, is you just have to build it one brick at a time with various experiences, with putting together a good demo reel, with getting a few, maybe not a few, but a lot of short subject films, maybe doing things that show in film festivals, that gets the interest of other filmmakers that would be like your music because they've now heard something, and you begin to try to amass your contacts and experiences that way. Obviously, that's a longer and a more difficult method, but that's what most of us, like myself, have done.
Yeah, that sounds like the long game, big time.
Yeah.
Had you heard that talk before you started, or did you hear it afterwards and go, yeah, that's what I did, number three?
Yeah, I knew it was number three. I was already in the number three world for a while when I finally actually happened to go to this event and hear him say it, and I'm just shaking my head yes to all of that. Yep, that sounds about the way it goes. But it is doable. It just takes a lot of desire that you really want this to happen. So you have to put up with a lot of rejection. Also, just a lot of waiting for projects to appear that you can actually get involved with. So it's a very long process until something finally clicks or one particular project gets a lot of notice. In my case, it was that movie I mentioned, The Contender. That was actually done as a mid-level budget independent film. They had some very big cast people with Jeff Bridges and Joan Allen and Gary Oldman. So it was very, very well cast. So it was going to be looked at when it was finished. And a lot of films, independent films like that, when they're finished, they're then circulated to the various big studios in LA seeking distribution. And so, it went all to Universal and Warner Brothers and to various people that would look at it. And it's just one of those films that Spielberg himself had watched one night and called up the director at his house and said, I just watched the movie. I really, really like it. I'm going to have DreamWorks pick it up, and we will now own it and be the distributor of it. And that was just extremely exciting, because when that occurs with a major studio or distributor, they put in literally millions of dollars. For an example, the Contender was made for $11 million. And the amount that DreamWorks put into the what's called P&A, the promotion and advertising of the film, where you see the trailers on TV and, there's big billboards in the city and there's buses that have the poster on them and all that stuff. They spent close to $30 million. So over twice the entire budget, almost three times the creation budget was spent actually only on advertising. And that's what you want from a major distributor, because if people don't know about the movie, they're never going to see the movie. So the promotion that happens around a film is often extraordinarily expensive, and it's an extremely critical part of the film's economic success. It gets people to the theaters. That's the whole purpose. So, the Contender did reasonably well. It's a political drama, so people sometimes just don't want to see them, but people certainly knew of it. And then, of course, it got accoladed with a lot of high critical review. And then the Academy Award nominations occurred for it. And all of that really helped it for obvious reasons. So that film was very important for me as well as my director. Because that got us to new projects, because this was considered a critical success. And that was important. So
that sounds fantastic. So that is like the pinnacle. So let's take it back to, that brick by brick thing you were telling me about just a minute ago. So, and I know that when you told me your story, I was like, wow, this really is brick by brick. I mean, starting out. So tell me about your first job in LA that you had.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I did immediately from school is that I started going around to the local recording studios, just saying who I was, and if they ever needed somebody to do, string arrangements for a singer-songwriter, perhaps, or if they have a commercial jingle that needs to be orchestrated out and sound really big with brass and rhythm section, and I could do all those things. And I got some work doing exactly that, mainly for commercial jingles. I started actually getting more of that kind of work because one person at the studio liked what I did, and so I became the recommended source to that. And then I found out that there was an actual jingle company nearby, the actual offices of where they were. And I went and literally walked in the door to see if there was a chance I could meet someone, and I did, to ask about working there. And they had all their current needs and positions filled. So, and they had 3 arrangers on staff that was doing the things that I was kind of doing independently. And I really wanted to work there because that would have been consistent work. It would have been literally a salary paying job, and that would be great. But they said no. And oddly, the building right next door to them was a racquetball court. And so I took a job at the little drink bar selling, vitamin water and all that stuff to people playing racquetball. But I could actually see out the front door from where I was positioned to see the parking lot of the jingle company. And whenever the owners, who I eventually met, would go out to their cars, I would suddenly run out and say hello to them again.
I love it.
I didn't do it every day because that would be kind of like a stalker, but I would do it, probably once a week. I would just make myself suddenly out in the parking lot too. And then we'd say hello, and I always expressed my enthusiasm and wanting to do something. Eventually, one of them broke down and said, okay, fine, you can start at $3.25 in the mail room.
Wow.
So that was actually a downgrade from what I was being paid in the racquetball corporate. Of course, that's what I wanted to do. So I go to the mailroom, and I'm just doing that kind of position for them. Next to the mailroom, though, was a tape editing station. This is before we're Pro Tools and digital editing, which is of course how we do everything. But this is back when everything's all on tape.
Right. Oh my gosh. So wait a second. So when you finally got to talk to that composer, like how do you break the ice on that parking lot conversation, Cause it's kind of awkward when you think about it, like here's this guy, like you'd met them before, but you're running out from the juice bar or whatever. Like how do you say, how do you start that conversation?
Right. Well, first of all, that wasn't a composer. This is the owner. He's a businessman.
Oh, okay.
The composers or arrangers didn't necessarily sit in the building all the time. They were often at home working, but they were staff nonetheless.
So you were going straight to the owners. Like you wanted to talk to them.
Yes, I'm going. Well, that's who's going to hire me. So that's who I talked to and explained my education. At the time, all I could give them was a cassette tape of some pieces I had written in school, and there's nothing wrong with that. But of course, the pieces I'm writing in school are relatively avant-garde, and they're contemporary sounding. And it's kind of one of them had actually finally listened to it and said, we're probably never going to hire you because this is not what we want to hear. We want to hear what your commercial work would sound like, if we're going to do that. And I understood that.
Oh, okay.
But he could see that I was very, very earnest in what I wanted to do. And this ultimately did lead to me starting in the mailroom because I didn't have anything to play him at that time. That was good. That was what they were hoping to hear. So this was the next best thing. So so back to my saga. So I'm in the mailroom, and next to the mailroom is this tape editing room where there were tape editors that were hired that took the 60-second jingles and cut them into 30-second versions or 10-second versions for radio and other purposes. And I learned how to do that just by watching and asking and sitting down and doing trial edits myself. And then I started to move from the mailroom more into the tape room, because one person actually ended up leaving, and I was able to take that tape editor's position. So that
Right.
was slightly step closer. And then I would also have to go to the studio to go pick up the master recordings. And so now I'm making trips to the studio. And that's where I actually met the various staff arrangers and composers. They then asked if I would drive in the middle of the night. Let me explain how the jingle company worked at that time.
Okay.
They were quite busy. So every Monday was a new recording session. With usually a rhythm section followed by a string section followed by a brass section, to make these kind of big sounding jingles of the day. This
I
is back in
see.
the late 70s, early 80s. And so what I would do, even though I was working in the tape room, they said, why don't you, I'm going to finish, I'm writing 3 things this weekend. And if you would come and pick up my handwritten scores, because that's how they were done, and take them to the copyist office, that would be great, because that's something I have to do, and I'll have to leave it under my front doormat at probably like 2 or 3 in the morning. So if you come by around 4 or 5 in the morning and pick it up and get it to the copyist at 6 a.m., which is when they open, like most copyists work very early in the morning, because the downbeats of their sessions, just like ours, are at 10 o'clock in the morning. So they need
Hmm.
4 or 5 hours, the copyist, to extract the part, handwrite the parts taken from the arranger's scores. So I would do those deliveries. And then I started sitting in with the copyist as one of the copyists as well.
Oh, how
And
did you
then,
do that? Did you just say, "Hey, can
well, I
I?"
just said, yeah, I'm a musician. I'm educated. I can do this. I'm happy to help you, extract the parts, and not so you're not so pressed for time. They only had 2 copyists. I became the third.
Uh-huh.
And then I also became the person that would deliver the final score and parts to the studio for the 10 o'clock downbeat. So I act like a librarian. I put the parts out in the stands. I give the arranger back their original score. And then I would sit there and just observe the session for about an hour or so. So I could just see how the process worked and how they multi-tracked and how they recorded. So that was just kind of an absorbing experience. And I would always have to take, of course, the final mixes that happened a few days later. I would go back to the studio to collect those. I would sit in on the mixing to just learn how the process works, and I would take them back and then edit them, because that was actually my real job. But I was able to put myself in a position to kind of learn the trade by being involved in various different parts of it. Ultimately,
Right.
as I found out, a lot of times in the recording sessions, because they have to hire the musicians for, let's say, a 3-hour minimum, and if they only have about 2.5 hours worth of material, the musicians still get paid the full 3 hours, because that's a contractual understanding.
Yes.
But there is extra time, and so when I saw that, I asked one of the arrangers. I said, next time this happens, I'd love could I bring a small piece of music that I've written, and to simply have them record this. I mean, they're getting paid either way, so it's not a hardship. It only take several minutes to run through it, maybe twice, and I'd write something
Yeah.
maybe a minute to 2 minutes long, so not terribly long. And they said, well, I don't see why not. So next time, let's see. And so I went back and I wrote a piece that I thought would be commercially appealing. And the opportunity came when they had a short session, and I could add it out there, and they were totally happy to play it for me. It's kind of like a reading, just a run
Hmm.
through, but I got a nice recording, because we're sitting right there in the studio. It's all mic'd up, ready to go. And the engineers didn't mind. I mean, it was no big deal for them. So they did that. And then I was able to take those better recordings and play those for the owners. And very slowly the confidence began to build, and I started to be acting like I was starting to arrange some of the jingles when the arrangers had very heavy work weeks. And then I said, okay, let's give this one to Larry, because I got too much to get done, and so that sounds fine. And so
That's
I
great. So,
I
yeah,
eventually ascended. Yeah, so I
you
started doing
really,
more of
yeah, you
that.
really, I
Yeah,
see. It sounds like you just really, you were just really working on getting to know every little step that goes into what you wanted to do so that you were totally skilled up. Like you just knew exactly
right.
what was going on in each step, which is awesome. And I love that you
Yeah,
saw an opportunity there for the leftover time, because, that's just you making up your own rule. Like, hey, you know what? I know these guys want to leave after their 2.5 hours, but they've been paid.
right.
So the harm done asking him to stay 10 more minutes for me or whatever. And then
Yeah, and I mean,
even,
I was going to say, one of the most important things about that and why that was made available to me is that while I was waiting for that opportunity, I would always talk to the musicians during the break or when they were
mhm,
leaving or packing up. And I'd say, what, how does this double stop work exactly? And, they could, musicians are very, into explaining how their instruments work if you have questions about it. And so I was very inquisitive. I was extremely polite and respectful. And so when the time came, the producer of the session would say, okay, well, Larry here, he has this little piece. Would you guys mind reading this through? And they go, oh, no, we'll do that for Larry.
right. By now
So
we know Larry and we like him.
yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And yeah, it's better for them to just get up and leave because they kind of get an extra, oh, wow, we just improved our hourly rate because we get the
exactly.
full 3 hours, but we're done. But, I made it very short and very palatable and they were happy to do it. And I did it several times until that got me to that next stage where I was then part of the arranging crew. And now I'm actually doing, part of the jobs that are happening. And I just matriculated into that part of the business. So I learned a lot
Right,
about the recording. So my studio chops got very good on how to orchestrate and arrange for multiple
right.
sessions in the studio. And, it is a particular skill set. So I got good at that. And I can keep going unless you want to
I
interject
just want
something
to,
else. But
well, I wanted to add, sorry to interrupt you again, but
yeah, that's fine.
I think it's a really important point to just shine light on that you were having conversations with the musicians and getting to know them because anytime you can have and I know this is going to come up again and coming up with some other stuff that we're talking about, but the personal connections that you're making because especially with composers and I'm on the musician side being able to talk to a composer and say, and if they actually really want to know genuinely, like, hey, does this note work? Or what's this range
Hmm.
like for you guys or whatever?
Right.
It's a way to build trust. So I think
Absolutely.
it's really
Uh,
smart.
I think it's true in any endeavor that you take on in your life for business or career. I mean, if you're an architect, you can't just sit alone. You have to go talk to people that do what you're doing or have done what you want to do, and you need to get advice and you need to interface with humanity. It's just the way it's done, and certainly it's true in the arts. So, I mean, no, there's no question. You have to be available so people know who you are and they're
Hmm.
going to be inclined to pick someone when they have choices and you want to make that as much in your favor as you can possibly make it. So it's just something you learn kind of along the way I've just learned to walk up and introduce myself to people and find out what they do. And because you just don't know how that's going to lead into something else. So
Yeah. So you were able to build up what you told me that it's called a reel, your portfolio
yeah,
essentially through doing
right.
this.
Back in the
How did that
day,
lead you to the next thing?
yeah, I mean, this during that time, of course, people are still basically handing cassettes around to each other, and
I
so I
see.
could get 4 or 5 nicely recorded pieces that I thought sounded kind of like film music because I started writing things that I thought were more cinematic in these opportunities in the studio, and I
Hmm.
used those demos to try to get to initially to an agent in LA, which is also a very difficult ladder to climb. It's very hard to get to them. They will not talk to you in the parking lot of the building next door. They're just going to get in their car and drive away. So they're very hard to approach. You need someone to kind of usher you in, or someone who they represent to recommend that they probably meet me, and so on. So that
Mm,
took quite a while. So I'm still working in the jingle company, and I'm doing more there, and that's good. But I also felt I was getting stuck in that, going, this is all great, but this is not moving me into what I want to do. So
right.
that's when I started using my extra session time to write more filmic sounding music so I could make some kind of impression on somebody, even though I wasn't doing it to any picture yet and didn't have a project, but it did sound like film music, and that might be enough. That was my hope. So
Right.
through a friend, uh, that was working oddly as a tape editor and the cassette maker for an agent. He himself actually wasn't a composer, but I knew who he was because he was somebody that had passed through our studio at some point. And I got him my copy, and then he was able to walk it into his boss, who was an agent, and said, "I know this guy Larry. I've heard him for a long time. I think he's really good. You should check this out." And so it was through that lucky moment that this agent listened to it and did like what he was hearing, and then called for a meeting. And so I went up, of course, right away and met with him. And there wasn't much to do because it was, well, you don't have any credits, and so we're going to have to do something. You should just start going to film festivals, and if there's any screenings that I'm going to, maybe you could come along and meet some people. And that was another very important aspect of what that helped me, and that is indeed, and I still do it to this day. I go to film festivals wherever they are, unless they're incredibly far away. And I will watch the various films, and I will meet the filmmakers, because almost always the filmmakers come to the festival because they want to have a Q&A after their film and so forth. And when they're done with that, that's when I actually go up and introduce myself and shake hands with people. And there's usually, one or two of the actors are there. The director is certainly there. Often one or two of the producers would be there. And what I learned over time is that if I walked right up to the director and said, "Oh, I really liked your movie, and I'm a film composer. Do you think I'd love to submit myself for consideration for maybe a future project or something," and it's a perfectly sincere thing to say, and it doesn't put people off to do that. But what I realized is that at that moment, at the film festival moment, is when they're showing off their current film, and they are most likely very happy with their composer and their score. And this is really not the time to be trying to insert yourself as as another composer choice for that person.
That makes sense. How did you figure that out?
Only because it took me about 3 times when I did. I'm going, they're not interested. Because they want to talk about their movie and the score that they like. And I go, this is the wrong time to do that. If there was a director that was simply attending the festival but didn't have a movie in it, that would be, I think, far more okay to do, because they're not in the middle of trying to showcase their current film. And since I walk around the lobby introducing myself to people anyway, I have met directors that are just simply in attendance, and that's okay. But what really worked in this example was I would then start talking to the producers, who I used to avoid. And because the producers are actually a better choice during the festival when there's a film there, they're there to also showcase the film, but they're emotionally detached from the film in such a way that they're not the director. The director chose their composer, and the producer is a good person for the composer to talk to, because they're more willing to exchange an email with you, and maybe you can send them some music and all that kind of stuff. And so I ended up spending more time talking to producers than I have gotten work that way. When I email them, let's say several weeks later, and I would go, "It was really nice to meet you at the screening last month, and I just wanted to send along this MP3, now that we have MP3s, of something I've done recently, so you have a sense of who I am. And again, I'd be very happy to submit ideas to any upcoming projects." And then if I catch them at the right time and they are actually preparing something new, they would often say, "Well, of course, I'm not the director and they're going to pick, but I'm happy to put your name in the hat, so we have people to review." And that has gotten me work in that way. So there's a lot of different ways, but I mean, ultimately what I'm saying is you just have to show up, and you go to events. Half of everything that ever happens is because I went somewhere, and probably 90% of everything that's ever happened to me has happened simply because I asked. I said, could I submit myself to your project? I mean, it's pretty simple. And rarely do they just flat out say no, unless they've hired somebody and you're too late. But normally they say, well, okay. And nowadays, of course, we use SoundCloud. And so it's very easy and non-intrusive to communicate with people by email. And you can put a link up to a SoundCloud where you very carefully have put in maybe 3 choices. You don't ever want to send someone, here's 37 pieces of music I did. It'll take you 2 days to get through it. No one is ever going to do that. Matter of fact, they'll probably just delete it. They won't even go at all because it seems overwhelming. So I make very, very customized SoundClouds that are very short, because what I want to have happen is interest, where they go, "Gosh, I just love this second cut. Can I hear more of it?" And that's what I want is to start a dialogue, and that's how you start a dialogue. You do not send your life's entire catalog to somebody expecting them to spend the time that you would, to listen to that stuff. They only will listen to the first. We do this right now on SoundCloud anyway. We listen to the first 10 seconds, maybe, Then we move down the graphic image of the sound bite, and we play like the big part, and maybe we'll play the ending. I mean, even I do that. I won't listen to a 3-minute song. It's not that much to ask, but I make my clips very short, 90 seconds, and only the most interesting aspects of the music is in there because I want them to reply to my email.
That totally makes
So,
sense.
yeah.
That's so smart to think about because you're thinking about the other person. You're thinking about the audience. I mean, essentially, this
it's
person
all
is your
about the other
audience.
person.
Yeah, like what are
And
they going to actually do?
Yeah, I get because I'm a composer and I've also been a professional orchestrator for a long time. I get a fair number of emails from musicians that are also trying to start out into the business as as players, and they think that I might be in a position to hire them. Sometimes I am. Usually, it's always done by contractors, but nonetheless, I do get these emails, and that's why I just went through this whole example because they often will send very, very, very long pieces of music or music where when they're going to come in and play, let's say, a solo of some kind, it really doesn't happen for several minutes. So they haven't edited the music in such a way that I can get right to the best of what they do very, very rapidly, or at least a sense of the quality of their playing. And that's all I really need to make a decision. But you can't send me a 15-minute piece of music. No one's going to listen to it.
Right.
So you have
important.
to really spend time to make these things highly accessible. And because you're going to send those kind of things to contractors, and those are the people that really will most likely hire you. That and word of mouth and people recommendation and all the other stuff that we have to do so people are aware of who we are. And then, people will recommend you in ways that you can't possibly imagine, but they might be in a position to do it.
Right. And you never know. So, I'm glad that you're bringing this up because it's actually happening to you where people are reaching out to you for potential employment. Do you have any other advice? Like if people are listening and maybe they're composers, so they're thinking about how to create their reel or, their portfolio besides the SoundCloud stuff you just mentioned. Is there anything else about, the way they make their reel that, or the way they're producing the track or anything?
Yeah. Right. Well, nowadays we're all really used to things that sound, they just simply sound good. The recordings are easy to do at home and other ways. And, you want to make sure that what you're sending is actually just on an audio level. It sounds good. So you don't want to just have one mic hanging in a recital hall and hope that that's going to be okay. If it doesn't sound really strong, it's just going to be unattractive to the ear. So those you have to go back and either re-record them or do something. So assuming that you've got a good recording of your work, then everything I already said still applies, where you want to make short versions of things to simply gain the interest of the person you're sending them to, and to keep them short. And I use SoundCloud because, like I said, I make a very special SoundCloud the page that's actually designed for the person I'm sending it to. So when they go, I don't send them to my SoundCloud as in general, which has a great deal of music on it because it's like an archive. I never want to send somebody that. I actually make it's called a sound set on SoundCloud. So you make a specialized sound set that just has 3 pieces, of which I've already in my home computer, I've edited them so they're short and they really, really get to the point. And then I send them the link to that particular sound set, which is custom designed for the person I'm sending it to, and that works really well. So that's what you need to do. Is every single inquiry should be customized to the person you're sending it to.
That's great advice too. So, a little minute ago, you were talking about going to those film festivals and how you'd figured out that you'd rather talk to producers most of the time instead of directors who had their films going at that festival, which makes a lot of sense. And you'd said that you originally avoided producers before, and then you changed your mind about that. So, what made you want to avoid them in the past before you had that realization?
I just simply, going to the director is going to the top, and that's where what I should do. And so that there's nothing wrong with that thinking, but the flaw was doing it right during the heat of their moment of their current film at the festival. That's when I realized this is not the time. So that's what I did as an alternative. But I'd still do meet directors, of course, at other functions, and these can be screenings of other people's films. It doesn't have to be a festival. I also go to specialized screenings where they're doing this particular film on this particular day, and I'll go to that screening, and because I know there's a lot of people in the industry will be there. I'm also interested in meeting people that work behind the scenes to deal with music, like music editors or film editors, people that are actually in a position to take your music and temp it into an existing show. I've gotten work that way where the editor has some of my music, and they go and they, for some reason, they thought of it and they go, this would work really well in this scene, and they cut it in. And when they're showing it to the producer or director, depends if it's film or TV, because television's all about the producer and film's all about the director. But they see it and they'll say, that really works. Who's that? And then that can lead to you actually getting hired because your music was put in by an editor. So there's just so many different ways to be noticed. And I always make a point of sending, like, if I finish a new score, I will send the entire score to the editor, because they will actually comb through it looking for real particular parts that I couldn't possibly know what part they need. It might be a very quiet part as opposed to a big thematic crazy part. So, I give them everything, because they know how to glean what the particular aspects of the scenes are. So that's I bring that up because that's different than what I just said about making a very customized short presentation to the director. That's that's what you do. And there's other ways from the composing side. I mean, I read the trade magazines. I see what films are going into production. I reach out to those shows. They have to, by law, when they're in the trades, give emails and contact information. And I will simply write cold emails to the people saying, this sounds like a very interesting project, and here's a SoundCloud, once again, kind of designed around what I think the film is about. And sometimes all I can get is the title, though the trade magazines often will put in a one-sentence description provided by the producer, probably, about what the project's actually about. And that's enough for me to send some particular pieces of music in hopes that this would interest them. But it goes back to that same kind of principle. And it's and also, and I think everybody knows this in their line of work, it's a numbers game. You have to do this all the time. And many things will go dry and unanswered, and you never hear anything, and that's very, very common. And then every now and then, there's a reply where someone says, I like this one thing, et cetera. And then as you get these chances to do the projects, now your credits are growing, and now people are going to see these things in their own right. And I would say at this point in my career that half the work I get is because people find me because they've seen something and they seek me out. And the other half is doing what I still do, going out and meeting people and see if there's something new to happen. So, for me, as an independent, my entire life is I'm either on a job or I'm looking for a job. And it's one or the other every day.
I think all of the stuff that you're saying can be applied to every aspect of the music business, regardless, just getting your name out there and considering every single possible entry point, kind of, because you've mentioned editors, direct, like it wouldn't occur to me that you would send to the editor and also to give them more material to go through. That makes total sense. So did you just figure this out as you went, or did someone tell you? Did you just research it?
No, actually, it was the film editor that I worked on a small film. I had finished another project, and they said, "Oh, well, send me that because I'll be working on different things. I'm happy to, put your scores like into my main hard drive of scores, and I use those as temping sources when I am up into a new project." And it didn't occur to me to do that until they actually asked for it, and then they said, "Here's how I would use it," and I go, "Oh, well, I should be sending this to every film editor I know." So
wow. So you transferred that over. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I do that. I do that now because I've gotten jobs from all kinds of different reasons or serendipitous moments that have happened. There's so much in the business that we can't control, but there is a handful of things that we can control. And that's where you spend your time. So what you can control is showing up to more events. You can control how many people you walk up and actually introduce yourself to. You can
Hmm.
control whose people you get emails and then give them a polite follow up in a little while, not get crazy about it. You have to keep a respectful distance, but this is where it's a numbers game, and you actually have the control over those numbers. Now, as far as,
Yes.
are they going to ultimately hire you? They're looking at 10 other composers. It's a competition. You may or may not be the final choice. That we cannot control. But we can
Hmm.
control the quality of our work, and we can control, how we're represented, and the fact that we can meet people and simply increase our numerical statistical chances will go up by doing the things that we can control.
That's a great way to look at it. So how did you ultimately, I know you said you got that big break with Contender,
Hmm.
and it was with you
Yeah.
you had forged a really great relationship with the director, I think, of
Yeah.
that
So,
movie.
yeah, I'll give
How
you
did that come
the
about?
backstory.
Yeah.
Yes, that was actually our third. Let me think for a second. Yeah, that was our third film. The first, when I met him, this is back to the original agent that heard my cassette.
Okay.
Um, he said, "Oh, I was just at this. I was helping one of our other composers, finish a film with one of these bigger producers, and there's this new guy in town who's working in their same office building. He's a kind of a writer director. He had been apparently a film critic for the New York Post, I think, for
Uh-huh.
some years. So he was a critic, and he came out to LA, and he actually had on Fridays he had a 5 minute um, critique of the current movies that were opening. That every Friday is opening day for a bunch of movies every week of the year, and so he would have reviews of these movies on one of the AM radio stations. They had hired him because he had been an actual newspaper critic for a long time, so he knew how to be a critic. And then he would go into the studio and do these kind of very quick 5 minute critiques on the current crop of movies that were coming out. And he actually became pretty well known around LA for his reviews. They were considered quite astute, but he was also very he was not shy on putting out criticism when things weren't good at all, and he would make it very known. So he was actually people like to listen to him, I think, more for what does he not like and let's hear why. And so he kind of got an interesting reputation. And this was enough for him to get himself, because he wanted to be a writer director himself and move forward, because he had spent years, watching 2 or 3 movies a day. He never went to film school. He's completely self-taught simply by watching 3 movies a day for 5 years. You learn what works
Wow.
and you learn what doesn't. And that's the kind of filmmaker he is. And very unusual, very interesting background just on Rod Lurie is who I'm talking about, the director. And anyway, so my agent had heard about him being down the hall at this thing had gone to in some capacity, and he got a meeting with me and him sitting in his little office, and he handed me a script that he had written. And I go, well, this is cool. Can I? He said, well, here, read this and tell me what you think. And so, we conclude the meeting. I go home, I read the script. I go to my little computer with my MIDI sounds, and I wrote 3 themes based upon these 3 particular characters in the movie on what I felt about them, without asking him any questions, just my take on the story. And here's what I think would be this character's theme, and here's what I think would be this character's theme. And so I make these little MIDI demos. I didn't record it. I had no money to record it with live players. I didn't want much time to go by. So, 3 days later, I call him up and say, I actually wrote some themes on the main characters. I'd love to play them for you. And he goes, oh, sure. So, during that time, I took my DAT player like out of my rack mounted gear and borrowed an engineer friend's really good headphones, and, lug all this stuff into his office and set it up, and then play these themes back while he sits here with the headphones on. I'm just like sweating bullets sitting in the room wondering how is this actually going. He had no expression. I couldn't read him at
Oh,
all.
wow.
But he listens quietly to all 3 without saying a word, and then he just thinks they're the greatest thing ever, and he can completely see how this would work for the character. And what that did is that film was never made. A few months later, he did like an 18-minute short film, and he asked me, "Would you do this?" And I go, "Well, of course." And so there's no money involved. There's no money involved for a long time. So I did that short film, which went around the film festivals, which is what usually short films do. And it got a lot of notice. It won a few awards in some of the bigger festivals, and that was very good. And that got enough interest with some outside producers that were able to fundraise enough money for him to do his first feature-length film. Again, very small budget. I think it was a little under $1 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but when you're working with SAG actors and you've got a set that has to be built and all the things that go along with it, the money goes very, very, very quickly. And so he wrote a very interesting drama called Deterrence. It's very much like 12 Angry Men. It takes place in one setting. So that's an affordable thing. It's in a diner. There's like this snowstorm while the president of the United States is on a campaign tour, and they get waylaid by the blizzard. So they're all stuck in this diner. There's a number of town folk in there, and then there's the president and his small entourage. And then while they're stuck there, they're watching the news and staying up on the weather. Suddenly there's an invasion in the Middle East, and he has to react immediately. And so we're thrust into this high stakes situation. I'm just going to give you the background of the film. So we do this movie Deterrence. There was no money for the score. I did the entire thing electronically with my MIDI stuff and just worked very hard on it to make it sound as good as I could, and that became the final score. That movie ultimately was purchased by distribution by Universal Classics. So that movie actually got a small amount of distribution, which meant it went to maybe 5 movie theaters for a week, like New York, Chicago, and LA. So it actually officially was released. And then, you can find things like this on Netflix if anybody's ever interested in seeing that early film. But anyway, I'm trying to get back to my arc here. So we did the first short film, then we did Deterrence. That also went around the film festivals in its own right and also got some awards and more recognition. And that brought Rod to his third picture, which was The Contender. And then we've already heard about what happened in the beginning of the show with that. And The Contender was picked up by Spielberg, got Academy Award nominations, and now, boom, Rod Lurie is on the world stage. And I'm just going, well, this is it. I guess he's going to call Jerry Goldsmith now, and I'm out of here. But no, I've stayed. He's been exceptionally loyal, and I've stuck with him, and we've done many, many films and primetime episodic TV shows together. And we just finished a pilot for a Western for TNT. And then we have another a World War II story coming up by mid next year. So he has been, for those that know the expression, my e-ticket in LA, because as he's done well, I've got to go along. And as people have seen his work, other directors have now called me, and then my work expands with other people. So,
that's fantastic.
But this is 20 years, 15 to 20 years. This story has been unfolding. So you have to pay rent. I understand that. You got to work in racquetball courts. You got to do this. You got to do that. But eventually you do have to take a leap of faith, and get into the business. So I ended up leaving. I'm going back to the jingle company. So ultimately I go, this is not working. This agent seems to show some interest. I have to leave. I have to spend the time I'm spending in the jingle job. It could be time spent, going to screenings and other possibilities. So I just had to do that. And I also started picking up work as an orchestrator for film people that I met because they wanted me to orchestrate. The very first film I orchestrated, that probably everybody knows, is called The Usual Suspects. I orchestrated that entire film because the composer wasn't able to do that aspect of the work, and then I conducted it, and I was basically became the music director of the entire score. So that was an important job. It paid well because it's orchestration, especially when you're doing the entire thing. They pay by the page.
Wow.
This is kind of going into kind of standard rate procedures and also union rate procedures and things like that. So when you're orchestrating, you're paid, the industry pays you by the page. And a page is considered 4 bars. If you ever look at a score page, they're basically already pre-printed into 4-bar pages. So a page is 4 bars. And if you're going to do a 6-minute cue for a scene, that's going to be whatever it's going to be, anywhere from 90 to 150 measures. which you would divide by 4, and that's going to tell you how many pages. Maybe it's 18 to 25 pages is what that particular score for that particular scene would look like. And then you're paid by whatever the negotiated rate per page is. So I know a lot of people that exist as professional orchestrators and only as professional orchestrators. They're busy enough and they can make more money than the composer sometimes, depending on the size and length of the score. It's really an amazing other part of the business. And this kind of leads me to the whole idea of just the film and TV and gaming, which we haven't even spoke about.
Yes, yes, that's what I want to talk to you about next. Exactly. I really want to talk to you about this next.
When you think about original music, everybody thinks about the composer, of course. They're it's like an iceberg. They're or a food pyramid. That's probably a better one. Food pyramid. So they're at the top of the pyramid because that's what everybody thinks of. They're the ones that are initially hired by the producers. They're the ones that are going to write the score. Right. But they have a team of people around them that's always necessary in the final delivery in the process of the creation of the score. In the first, week or month and a half or so, the composer's by himself, making his MIDI demos at his computer, because that's what everybody's listening to until they approve them all. And then once things are getting approved and you're starting to get ready for the final delivery, that means we need to schedule a recording session. We need to hire musicians. If it's big, I need to hire a contractor who will then hire the musicians, like if it's an orchestra. If it's just 5 people, I'll probably hire them because I want to pick them by hand. I have real special people that I want on there, but I can also use a contractor. So they're involved in this. The musicians are involved in it. Anywhere from 3 to 5 different engineers, from the recording engineers, the final mix engineers. So there's a number of audio engineering people that are involved in the score. Then there's like I just mentioned, the orchestrators that are preparing the final printed score from your MIDI material. I do my own orchestrations because I can and I want to, but then I always hire copyists to do the part extractions, and so copyists are now needed. So as you can see, the food pyramid is really quite large that surrounds the creation of the score, and this is where the industry is important and does well. That's why Los Angeles, of course, is a mecca, because there's a lot of recording studios and there's a great deal of film and television scoring that's going on in that city. Because LA still is, the biggest place where scores are going to be recorded, even though there's a lot of newer competition now for this part of the business.
Right. So let's talk about that. Yeah, let's talk about that because, musicians know that they're, I'm talking mostly the musicians who don't live in LA. We're all kind of like, that must be the best place to make the biggest amount of money outside of having a job in an orchestra, professional orchestra. Yeah, so, probably. And we know that there's, I'm saying we, like the musicians outside of LA know that it's like the big bucks, right? But like at the same time, why is it only focused in Hollywood? Is it, I suppose mostly because that's where the films are being produced, but is it possible that they will spread out and access musicians in other places like New York and Chicago or wherever other studios might be? Yes. And what's the story with that? And, because we also know a lot of musicians know that there's the union is involved, and there's, you had shared with me in a previous conversation that there's a lot of things going on with that. So maybe we can start there with just the reason why it's mostly in LA.
Sure. The main reason why it's in LA, you just alluded to, is that's where the big studios are. And this is where music and scoring of film and TV is called post-production. The production itself can occur anywhere. They're going to fly to outer Mongolia to shoot, this particular action thriller because that's the location they want to be in. That's the production. But post-production is after they've shot everything, and now all the film is back in most likely the studios in LA, where all the personnel that, like the film editors I talked about, they live in LA because that's where they're going to be editing the film, regardless of where the production of the film took place. I see. So that is the most basic reason why LA is still the place to be if you're going to be in post production. So the editing of the film happens there. The score will most likely be recorded there because they want the studio executives and the producers that of course live in LA that work for, let's say, Warner Brothers or Universal or smaller studios too. It doesn't matter. They're all kind of there because that's where the deals are cut and that's where the contracts are signed. And since the editing of the film is most likely going to be in LA or New York or Chicago, but still primarily LA. Therefore, the music, once the editing is done, and the composers most likely live in LA, so they can, be in touch with the editors, walk into the editorial suite, have meetings with the director throughout the course of the work that they're writing. So we're there. We're just simply physically there.
Right.
So and of course, there's big stages. The stages at Fox and Warner Brothers and Sony are really big sound stages, and so they're designed specifically for the scoring of these movies. So anyway, this has been where the industry's been at for many, many, many years. So if a musician was interested in that kind of work, they would you would have to move to LA in order to be within the talent pool that the contractors in LA would then draw from. So I just wanted to answer that on a physical level. But the business change is changing, and it's changing all the time. And one of the things that has happened is that competitors for the scoring part of the work have now popped up all over the world. London would probably be the biggest competitor to Los Angeles and New York for scores, and big movies are done there, like Pirates of the Caribbean and The Last Star Wars, I believe, and things like that. So, there's really, really big projects are actually going to London, and some of that is because it's possible the composer has some reason to want to be there to work with those people. That's usually not the strongest reason to go. It's almost always a producer's choice, an executive producer's choice, and it has to do with cost. And it gets a little bit complicated here because the union in London or just the UK, like our union, looks out for the players. They have a standard rate and procedure of what people are paid and what their hourly rates are and how much you need to pay into their health and pension accounts, and all of that is fine. We're identical with the UK as we are to them. So we have the AFFM here in the United States, which governs all of these things, and these are good things. But there is one important difference in the UK union. They have a variety of different contracts that the producers would sign when they want to do a score, and the producers are the one that actually create. The producers themselves are the ones that are in a relationship with the union. Yes, we might be union members, but we don't pay special payments and residuals. Let me go because I'm not sure if we got this. But in the United States AFFM, if you work on a union recording for a film or TV show, when that show moves on in its life to what is called a new use. Let's say it's a film. The first use, of course, you record the score, they put it in the movie, and then there it is at the theater, for the summertime release. That's great. And then after a while, that movie's going to end up, as you know, on HBO. It's going to be rentable at Netflix. It could be streamed on Amazon. It'll go through these different iterations where it's being re-released in different formats. And when that happens, that's called, in the union, that's called a new use. You're taking our original purpose, which was the recorded score for the film release, and now you're doing a television broadcast. So that's considered a reuse or a new use. And then the musicians that played on that contract would be paid an amount of money, not the original amount they did for the recording session. That's the biggest pay, but they will get a portion of that same session again. And then when it goes to TV, they get another one. And then when it goes to streaming, it's another one. Each one of these are kind of calculated in different ways. But the point is that whenever this occurs, or they dub it in a foreign language and it plays overseas, which it certainly would do, that's also considered a new use, and that would also create another special payment, or these reuse payments that are paid by the union directly to the musicians because that's what this particular title is over the course of its life is going through, and that's a great thing. A lot of players that move to LA that want to get into this industry, this is one of the main reasons you want to do this, is because this becomes an ancillary money that's coming your way. And if you play
Hmm.
on countless films and TV shows for a 20-year career, what you're earning every year in the residuals and the reuse of all of these titles that you build up over time are extremely important and significant. And the people that are paying that money, even though it's distributed by the union because they take their dues out of it, of course, but the
Right.
people that are paying it are the producers. So these are the execs at Warner Brothers or Universal, and they actually have what's called the assumption agreement with the union. They actually personally, every 3 or 4 years, they will re-sign or renegotiate the assumption agreement on what these things are going to mean. And that's why this part of union recording is so attractive, and it's important to the players that are lucky enough to do it. Meanwhile, as the world changes, the competition for the scoring of films and TV shows is all over the world now. So London would be our biggest competitor. And they also have a similar contract that we work, like they would pay residuals to their musicians for. But where the big difference has occurred and why this is important now is that London also offers multiple contracts, one of which is you can pay our musicians a lot more upfront. So their hourly rate goes way up for the original session, but we will then waive the need for you to pay any reuse or residual payments thereafter. So the producers, which of course care about money and the cost of their films, they like that. So, they have a strong incentive to go to London, even though it costs them a lot more to record their score. But they will opt for that. They will opt for that because they feel it's better in the long run to do that. So that's a problem. And that's what's happened this has been true for some time now. So over the last 10, 15 years at least, more and more films are going to London or other places like Prague, and there's other
I
choices
see.
too. Yeah, so they're going away. And so now the player base that's in Los Angeles is getting very tight. The contractors, which are really important to the players, are calling probably the top 200 or 300 people that they like to use. But the pool that's still living there, or people that are new that are moving there, it's going to be very, very difficult. It can be done over time and just very careful posturing, I would think, that you can
Hmm.
hopefully get in with that inner circle that the contractors are using. So it's tougher. Back to your original question, though, as far as the rest of the country in the United States, there is no reason why any community could make themselves available and known to do film recording. If they're going to do it under the AFM contract, which I assume that they would because they have community orchestras that are perfectly viable in nice recording spaces such as Symphony Hall, there is
Hmm.
no reason why you couldn't compete for some of this same pie. My only point is that the pie is being cut up and large portions are going overseas because there's a difference in this particular contractual point. And my personal opinion is that I think the AFM should offer competitive contracts so they can actually compete directly with the people that are removing the work right from under their feet. And this
I
is
see.
not. This takes time and is not easy to do. This is a political situation between the main office in New York and then you've got the top locals in LA, that want to kind of keep things maybe the way they are. It's hard for me to comment on the precise posture. Everybody probably has an opinion on that, but this is the reason I can tell you that this is the sticking point is all about, the UK and other countries offering multiple contracts. And the U.S. really only offers like one or two, but you can never get a contract similar to what they do overseas. So it's affecting
Right.
the
Okay.
industry.
So
It's affecting the industry. Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that, like, essentially, if there were more options to different contracts for the United States, then it would
Yeah.
be more competitive to keep the work in the US, and then there might be enough work that the work could actually spread. Like it would be more than enough for the people in LA
Yeah.
and other areas possibly
Absolutely.
to get a piece of the pie and get that money. But then they would have to give up that really great,
Well,
residual
yeah.
contract
Yeah,
possibility or
and
whatever.
we technically we would rather not lose that because we consider that an attractive feature. But it comes down
Yeah.
to what you just said. The world is a smaller place now, and to be competitive on the world market requires being competitive on the world market. So you have to
Right.
know what your competition's doing, and if they're offering something that's more attractive to your customer, um, you need to do you need to offer at the very least the
Right.
same thing, if not the same thing, something that's somehow better. I mean, you can't blame the customer for going for a better deal. So
Right.
that's where these things are difficult, because unions are they're like they're large institutions. They move slowly, but I think if people in their own communities were interested in this, um, they should go to their own local and say, what's the deal? Could you please represent us, or write a letter, and what can we do to change things? I mean,
Right.
these things can be changed, and they are and have been. So that's how America actually works, is we get things started and then we improve upon them over time. And we're in a situation in this particular example of the industry is that we're losing an enormous amount of work because of this particular issue.
Yeah,
So
so
yeah.
essentially, like that was going to be one of my questions is to a musician who's maybe not in the union yet or just starting out, or a musician even who is in the union but isn't really sure what the point is. I guess the answer you can add to this too, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is the reason is so that you can try to make changes in the industry and make it better for you as a
Hmm.
player, as an employee of this industry,
Yes. I mean, the union
essentially.
exists to collectively bargain for us. So if you're a member of us, then your voice is needs to be heard, and they're there to assist you and make your career technically a better thing. So,
Right.
the unions that most people that are in the AFM in smaller cities or communities are there because of their orchestra and their opera and or summer pops or whatever it is that's happening, and that's
Hmm.
fine. And the same thing happens, by the way. Your local goes in and signs an assumption agreement with your local symphony for how many services are going to happen per year. What's the rate of pay? Do we have to be shared with pops? Can we do this with opera? All those things have to be determined,
Right.
usually by your local, accordingly. And that is certainly a good reason to be a member, because this is how you're going to get your pension and welfare. I'm assuming you're getting contributions paid there, and everything else that comes with a union contract. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a very pro union person. And as I don't know if we got cut off on this part, but I am a member of the AFFM in the areas that I can be, such as a conductor or a
Hmm.
piano player. But we don't, as I may have mentioned, they don't represent composers. There's nobody represents
Right.
composers. It's
Yeah.
really bizarre, really bizarre. But for rank and file players, yeah, I think the union still is an important factor. I know you have to pay annual dues, but that gives you the right to say, I want more representation, or I would like you to consider this, or would you please talk to New York on our behalf about this? So
Right.
they have no reason to say no to you. This is the unions are meant to develop, and how you have to deal with, just like I do, things like streaming issues and the new digital technologies that are upon us. The union has to stay up to speed. It's about staying competitive in the market and making sure that they're capitalizing on everything they can for the sake of their members. I mean, isn't that the
Right.
charter? I mean, that's what it's about. So
Right.
yeah,
And
I
keeping
think
up with these things.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you need to kind of have a meeting amongst yourselves, and come up with an agenda list and put it forward, if not directly to New York, at the very least to your local, and then say, we want more of this, or why can't we have this? I think that's just, I don't know how else to put it, but that's the American way.
Yeah, that is the American way. It's exactly great way to put it. And this, if this is the only way that it can be affected, then that people that are union members that are passionate about this, or feel like the way that it is going isn't fair, that's their choice. They
Hmm.
can reach out to the union and be the squeaky wheel,
Absolutely, no, absolutely.
essentially.
Especially if you can do it as a group. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sure people in one community orchestra probably all has something that they agree that would be better. And then that'll just mean their current contract between the orchestra and the town and the local. I'm talking about a larger vision here, where you want the
Yep.
union to to actually open up work opportunities that have never come your way, and there's reasons for that, and those can be changed.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, because it seems like, wow, there's so many movies coming out, and everyone knows that there's more and more work being shipped off to Europe, and everyone kind
Yeah.
of, since they're not educated about the situation, they say, oh, this is not fair. Why is it getting recorded in Europe when there are plenty of really great qualified musicians here that would love the work?
No
So,
doubt. And, I'll give you another example that is working. Several states like Georgia and Louisiana have the leading tax incentive programs for the producers.
mm,
But that's the production side, not the post production side. The production side, so people will go, for example, The Walking Dead. Everybody's probably aware of that show. That's completely done in Georgia, and that and other movies are done there as well as Louisiana, because what they do, they will in essence give back the taxes that they are spending to shoot and create their shows in these states. They will then get a check 3 to 5 months later with the taxes actually returned to them, to the producers, the people that are paying the bills. And the producers
wow.
go, oh, well, that's really great. Let's go shoot in Louisiana or Georgia. We can make those locations look like what we need. So that happens. This of course has been happening in Canada. My gosh, for 40 years. I mean, and we all know it. It's either Vancouver or Toronto. Many, especially television, is shot up there. Toronto looks like New York City, so they shoot a lot of films about New York, but they're actually shot in Toronto. And one of the reasons for that is the simple exchange rate. The Canadian dollar is weaker than the American dollar, so the producers are paying less for the same for the same things they have to go out and purchase. So,
Oh, interesting.
Canada has always been a choice to go shoot something. Now, in our world of post productions, it's a little bit harder because that's more difficult to get to because the studios might not be there, or the musicians, the masses of musicians may not be available there. So that's why the post
Right.
production, as I was saying way long ago, is primarily still in LA. However, Georgia now is building sound stages, and they want to bring more post production. It would behoove the producer to not only shoot their show, movie or TV show there, but they could also stay there and do all the post production, edit it, record it, do everything there, and get and increase their tax breaks, because the state of Georgia has gotten very aggressive and competitive and is offering the very best in the country, and that's why it's a destination. So, those
Interesting.
things, it is happening in different aspects of the industry. The scoring is still kind of sluggish, but that's where you want to kind of stand up and kind of talk about that and see if there's what can we do in ours. Maybe it's going to the state governor's office saying we want to have tax incentive programs for LA producers. We want to bring that kind of stuff here.
Right.
And yeah, somebody has to lead the charge, and believe me, there are people in these states that led that exact charge, and they are working. And now Georgia's a big destination. So
That's so
yeah,
interesting. That's so interesting. So
it's
musicians,
happening.
they have more power than they think if they
They do.
just go out and
Yeah,
start approaching people like you've been saying. This whole interview is approaching people, starting conversations,
that's right.
even it's about getting more work and more opportunities in your
Hmm.
state as a musician. So that's great. I really appreciate you diving into that, because there's a lot of confusion out there about it, and I think this is going to really clear things up for people.
Well,
So
yeah, yeah. Well, I hope so. I hope it sheds some light,
shed some
or
light on
maybe
it.
answers
Yeah.
some questions. But it's really it always comes down to whether you're trying to just make your own personal career better. You have to you have to be your own advocate. You are your best advocate, so you need to be skilled in what you need to do to make that so. And then
Yeah.
when you're representing yourself in a group like within a union, yeah, you should be able to get everybody excited about new possibilities of income streams that simply aren't coming your way. There's no
Yeah.
reason why they shouldn't come your way.
Right. Especially
And
if they are
so that's
already existing in the world. They're just there
exactly.
and they're not coming over there. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's why
exactly.
places, yeah, like Georgia and Louisiana are now cracking that code and breaking that apart on the production side. So the people are coming there to shoot their projects. They're not necessarily staying to record them, because it's kind of it's a different aspect of the business, and you have to have the infrastructure to do that. It's pretty easy
Right.
to come in with a film crew into a state and go to an interesting location and shoot. That's not as elaborate as having editorial suites to cut the film, or elaborate recording studios, with a good musician base to record them.
Right.
But New Orleans and Louisiana certainly has offered this service, and they are doing this service. It's usually a smaller group in a smaller studio, but they're getting a fair amount of indie projects If you go there, if I were to go there, I haven't done it myself yet, but if I went there to record as a composer, indeed, the state of Louisiana would send me whatever tax I paid to record there, everything from my hotel room to the studio to the engineers, any taxes to the contractor paid for the musicians. I would actually, the state, not the players, not the locals, but the state of Louisiana tax office would actually send me that money back. Now, I'm not saying that's a ton, but it's an incentive, and people go, that's enough.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
If you're paying 6% taxes for your costs, then that's 6% coming back to you. Why wouldn't you do it?
Exactly. Especially when it costs that much to do a film, you're going to look for whatever you can to save
Hmm.
money. That's
That's right.
awesome. Well, thanks. I have a few more questions for you, just my final questions.
Okay.
The first one is, what is the one habit or behavior that you've developed over your career that has impacted your career the most, would you say?
I think it's things I've already kind of covered, especially in the beginning. It's
Yeah.
just getting out and meeting people. This idea of networking is not brain surgery. It's what we do. Back on this one talk I heard from this one agent, one of the other things he said that I never forgot, and it's probably actually just an old phrase anyway. But if you want to catch fish, you go where the fish are. So
Right.
you can't expect not to step out of your comfort zone or where you physically are, and expect it all to just come to you. It's not going to do that. You have to be your own advocate. You have to, people have to know who you are and what you have to offer. This is back to the part I was saying. These are the things you do have control over. So you should exercise that and get good at it and exhaust it. You should almost say, what did I
Yes.
do today? What 15 minutes today am I going to do that's going to potentially mean something, as far as my career goes. And there's probably something you can do, and it might even be something repetitive. So it's not like you're making it up every day, but you need to
Yeah.
spend more, get back on the phone, write some more cold emails, see what
Right.
happens.
I love it. That's awesome. So, who
All
in the
right.
classical world is inspiring you right now?
Well, oddly, I'm actually teaching film music right now at Indiana University at the Jacobs School of Music, and we this week we have Christoph Penderecki is here, and he did the St. Luke's
Uh,
Passion last night. It was 242 people on stage. It was absolutely mind blowing.
oh my
Um,
gosh.
so yeah, right now I'd say he's in the top. So
That's
yeah, he's
great. And
he's
that,
he's a very nice guy, and he's very interesting. He's been through it all. It's just he knows all the 20th century composers that have lived and died, and he's still with us. And it's anyway, that's fresh on my mind. So that's my answer right now. But
that
yeah,
sounds like an amazing concert. I went to Indiana, so where was the
okay.
performance?
Well, here on the campus, it's at the MAC, their Musical Arts
The
Center.
map.
So
Okay.
it's the
Yeah.
big performance hall. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. That sounds great.
Hmm.
Do you
Yeah.
do you have anything to promote?
For myself,
Yeah.
well, yeah. I mean, I this is mainly for people interested in film music and composing, but I do a summer workshop. It's called the Palomar Film Music Workshop. Palomar just has to do with where I live in Southern California. There's a place called Palomar Mountain. So I call it the Palomar Film Music Workshop as just so it has a moniker. But it's where there's a famous observatory on the top of that mountain, and so some people know of it only for that reason. But anyway, that's what it's called, and I do it every June in the outside of San Diego, in this nice rural retreat area. And we take over kind of an old ranch, and I hand out scenes every day, and people write music to those scenes every day. We critique them at the end of the afternoon. Every morning, I bring in a Hollywood professional because we're only a couple hours from Hollywood. So, director, maybe a film editor, a producer, somebody expert in their aspect of the business, and they do nice presentations. They bring in a game composer every time too, because gaming is such a big deal
Yeah.
nowadays. So yes, that's in a nutshell. That's what the workshop is. It's very immersive, really fun. Culminates with a nice kind of Hollywood style recording session at the end, so you can go away with a really good recording of the best piece of music you wrote that week for your favorite scene. So that's what we do in a very quick nutshell. You can find us online. If you just look up Palomar Film Music Workshop, will be the top result.
Yes, and I'll put the website in the show notes so people can click
Oh,
straight
okay.
from iTunes and then they can
Yeah,
find it. It sounds like a great opportunity. That sounds like fun. Even though I'm not a
it is
composer,
fun.
I think it sounds like it would be really fun to do. That's great. I
Yeah, we
love
get
it.
We get all kinds. I mean, people internationally come. We get composition faculty that are just simply interested in learning more about film music. And then, of course, we have a lot of like recent graduates or PhD students in composition that come because they're just into film. And then we also have people that are over from the rock and roll world that just want to get more into film scoring. Trent Reznor being an excellent current example, and they just want to know more about the process. So it's not like you have
Yeah.
to be a comp major, even though of course we get quite a few of them. But we get people from all walks of life that want to get into that skill.
It's fantastic. It sounds great. I love that you have that opportunity for people. It's
Yeah, it's
awesome.
fun.
So thank you so much, Larry. I've really enjoyed getting to know you on our calls and on this
Mhm.
interview and diving into this whole world that everyone knows is there, but and it seems so exciting and also sort of mysterious because we all watch
Mhm.
movies, but we don't really get to
Right,
know what
right.
goes on right behind the scenes. So this is really
Yes.
fun. Thank you so much. I
Well,
really
my
loved
pleasure.
it.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. See you next time. Bye.